Note that we are live streaming, so if you can just make sure you are using your microphones, that would be fantastic. The emergency procedures we do have on the screen, so please take a note of them. If you do have your mobile phone on you, if you could please make sure it is turned to silent mode, that would be great. We'll move through to our opening karakia. Whakatakataho ki te uru, whakatakataho ki te tonga, kia mā kina kina ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai, e he aki ana te atakura, he tio, hei huka, hei hauhu, tihei, mauri ora. Okay, so we're moving through to apologies. I've received an apology from Councillor Kerry Brown and Deputy Mayor Lewis for early departure as well. So I'll move those apologies, seconded by Councillor Briggs. All those in favour say aye. Those against no, declare that carried. Moving through to public comment, we have two members of the public who wish to speak today. So we have Bruce Spedding on behalf of the Eastbourne Community Board and also Mike Fisher as chair of the Batoni Community Board. And they have asked for a little bit more time, which is completely fine. If you could keep your comments to 5 minutes or any questions you want to have within that. If that sounds good, Bruce. Yep. And obviously, if any of the other members want to come up, no problem. So Bruce, if you'd like to come forward. So Bruce is speaking to the Representation Review initial proposal.
Kia ora, Mayor Barry, councillors and council officers. I am speaking on behalf of the Eastbourne Community Board in response to the Representation Review report and proposals. This is a board-only response as we have not yet had opportunity to consult with our community, something we plan to do extensively in the near future. I want to acknowledge the Community Board members present and apologies from those unable to attend. We would have all liked to have been here, especially our Chair, Belinda Moss. The board met briefly with the panel early on in the process. The meeting was largely taken with the panel describing their role and processes they were planning to follow. There was little opportunity to actually consult or present our experiences and involvement in communicating with, consulting and representing our community. And we did not know that this one meeting would be the only face-to-face contact the board would have with our community. The panel have emphasised they are looking for fairness, equity and an appropriate 21st century approach to communicating and working with communities and communities of interest within the Hutt City. Their own surveying shows that communities with community boards understand their representation and identify most strongly with their community at a 70 to 80% rate. Their survey results also makes it clear that the least understanding and satisfaction in the current system lies with the Northern Ward, 50%, but also identifies that the Northern Ward is the most interested in community board representation at 75%, which is pretty close to the wards that do have community boards. They also note that attempts at other forms of community representation, such as appointed committees and panels, have not survived the test of time. I can actually attest that that's not true, but anyway, they conclude that positioning community boards between community and council is not likely to be successful, despite the fact that communities themselves have indicated significant satisfaction. Their proposal is to instead appoint an unpaid community agent to fulfil the role currently occupied by the community boards. Overall, there are far too many contradictions and unsubstantiated claims in the report to cover here, but these will be raised during consultation. Elected community boards are answerable and accountable to both the community and the council. An appointed unpaid agent is answerable to neither. An appointment has already been demonstrated by their own research to not work in a community context. A community board has multiple representatives, each with their own skills, networks, and areas of interest and focus. They live within the community and have contact with individuals and groups on a daily basis. The load is shared, allowing board members to be students, parents, working or retired, and still carry on their duties. They will represent and be representative of their community. A single appointed agent will have a limited network, will unlikely to be able to sustain any other responsibilities, and will only represent their own demographic. The candidates for agent roles have been identified, apparently, as community leaders, suggesting they are probably already fully occupied in their involvement in the community in some form or other. So where will such a person find the time and the energy to take on such a significant responsibility? Boards such as ours meet formally every 2 months, informally every few weeks, and more frequently as issues arise, quite often several times a week, and we share the responsibilities. It is proposed that an appointed agent meets the responsible councillor every 6 months, and there is no suggestion on how or when the agent will interact or communicate with the community at all. This would probably require significant support and resources from the council to be effective. The 21st century has started out marked by an increased need for community resilience, highlighting a need for localised response to an event. This week is a classic example of that. A community board with its own developed communications and networks has been shown to be the most effective at responding to early stages of an event, giving the Central Council time to triage, marshal their resources and respond at a higher level. The community board model has been demonstrated to be the most resilient, popular and effective form of community engagement out of all the options covered. We feel that this model could be adapted and used for all the wards to gain the equity and fairness desired by the panel. We encourage the council to explore the revised ward model as proposed and then implement a community board structure in each ward as the most equitable and effective way of engaging the communities. Ngā mihi.
Thank you, Bruce. Is there any questions from councillors? Councillor Shaw?
Thanks, Bruce, for coming in. So the question I have is, can you give us an example of where you think the existing community board structure has been most useful and successful under the current structure?
So many examples. It's hard to know where to start, but Murray Gibbons just mentioned on the way here about a situation where someone contacted him where a contractor was about to cut down a lot of our native bush, something to do with power lines, and Murray responded immediately by contacting the council, got one of the council officers to come along and sort of mitigate the damage that was about to be done by a contractor who did not understand the scope of what they were being asked to do. That's that immediate response that a community board can give. There's 5 or 6 of us available more or less on call, and any one of us can drop in and act on something fairly quickly.
Any other questions? Deputy Mayor Lewis, then Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you. Thanks, Bruce, for a very good submission. You've highlighted lots of points that I know you will raise with the community as well. Question around connections to community in regard to a community, say Western Hills, that has residents groups. How do you see residents groups as opposed to community boards doing that job? Do you think they could do it on their own?
Well, I think, I don't know much about residents groups, but I assume...
Sorry, explain. You've got Days Bay, associations,
yes.
Yeah.
But my understanding of residents groups is that they are self-appointed. There is no election system, so there's no accountability. And I think that accountability, both up and down, is very important. And yes, they can sort of, a residents association works in a very confined area. We have several residents associations in Eastbourne, but they look very much after their own patch. The community board is the glue that sometimes pulls them all together and says, let's look after Eastbourne or the Eastern Bays as a whole.
Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you, Bruce, and thanks for the submission. Thanks to the board. Just at the end of your submission, you talked about an equitable array of community boards across the whole city, and I wondered, and it might be too early to ask this question, if you've thought about what that might look like, given that in our existing setup by virtue of history, the Harbour Ward has 2 community boards, one in Wainuiamata, and they're quite variable in size, I think. Waimea probably represents about 3 times as many people as Eastbourne. When you roll that out across the valley floor, for example, how do you think it can be divided up in an equitable way? So voters feel that they're getting the same level of service from a community board.
The ideal would be, well, there is a formula, I think, for working out how many people are on each board and how much support the board gets financially from the council. So I think that system is probably as good as any. So there is a talk about, well, there was a mention of perhaps merging 2 community boards for the Harbour Ward into one. That makes sense in terms of equity. And then, you know, some formula to calculate the number of members on that board appropriate to the area. There's always a desire to get a sort of a good geographic distribution in boards. We've tried for that in Eastbourne. Not easy, but worth working towards. I wouldn't stipulate it, but, you know, yeah. So I'd say a formula based on population is fine. This, of course, these are my personal responses in this case, not the board.
Any other questions of Bruce? Okay, and certainly we do have obviously Paul Swain here as the chair of the independent panel, who may want to address some of those points or questions. But I suppose my one question, Bruce, was just to clarify, do you have an ask of council at this meeting today in regards to what you've stated, or do you accept that, you know, this proposal to go out for community consultation as it is?
To be honest, I see this, I came along expecting this to be a rubber stamping exercise to accept a report as it is presented. I notice in the report there's a little bit of a time bomb that says if it's not accepted in its current form, it could create problems downstream. So I see that as a mechanism to stop any changes being made at this stage. But I do see that the next month will be a period of quite intense submissions and information as to why the community board system is probably the best solution to working with communities, particularly in the light of the current resilience issues that communities suffer now with all the weather issues we're having. It's the communities that respond first and fast. And that's why I think, one of the reasons I think a community board is important.
No, thank you for that clarification, Bruce. Okay, really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Mike Fisher. Welcome, Mike. Yes, Simi, welcome. Okay, so total of 5 minutes. Over to you.
Thank you, Your Worship and councillors. Good afternoon. I'm joined by fellow board member Simi here as well. He's going to help make some points. Certainly, we would agree with many of the points that have been raised by Eastbourne in that very excellent submission. We've had an informal discussion amongst board members, and I just really want to highlight at this early stage some of the bullet points and ideas that or thoughts that came out of that discussion, knowing that further discussion is and consultation with the public is going to occur, and our final views may develop further or change. And we also discussed the overall, not just the community board situation, but the overall report. So in no particular order, one of our initial thoughts was that the Harbour Ward would be underrepresented with only one councillor, given the number of issues it faces, particularly if the community board were to be abolished. And we've said on many occasions, that the Petone area as a whole faces an enormous array of issues just because of its geography, because of the hazards, because of the facilities, etc., etc. I don't need to reiterate those, you're well aware of them. With the makeup of the suggestion of 2 new amalgamated wards with 2 councillors, we felt that that made Harbour Ward quite disadvantaged in our opinion. The workload for that councillor with no community board backup in the way that Eastbourne has alluded to with the amount of work that the community board can take on board is a disadvantage. It was also noted by some that the amalgamated wards would include areas with quite limited communities of interest, that there could be arguments in favour of different boundaries, etc. Increasing the number of councillors in the two new wards is detrimental to some other areas of the city, partly based also on arguments re increased presence and improving knowledge of council operations, etc. Some of the arguments in favour of the extra councillors to us seemed debatable, and there would be other ways around it, like better civics lessons. Again, like Eastbourne, we queried the number of responses against the retention of boards, as opposed to the number overall that were in favour. And previously, councils have talked about extending community board delegations to help reduce workloads. And again, we would say with greater delegations, the community boards can become even more relevant as we go forward. And to our mind, the abolition of boards is at odds with Local Government New Zealand's localism ethos. If ever you needed community boards, again, as Eastbourne has said, it's in the current environment. And going forward, there's some points that Semi would like to just make on that.
Kia ora, everyone. Good afternoon. I do have a couple of points, but before I do, I'd just like to thank the council for putting this report together. I think it's important that democracy is looked at quite importantly for our communities and our regions. I think reading the report, there is awareness of community boards out there. Have we been able to lean in a lot more? We're not quite sure. Do we have teeth? I'm not quite sure, but that's what this review is about. Are you willing to give community boards teeth to be able to help their communities make decisions? The other thing about community boards is by the review that we're in, are we future-proofing the community that we're living in? With the growth that we have in our community and the diverse people that are coming into it, the many voices that we need to hear from, it'll become a very busy room, this room, if we didn't have that next layer down for them to engage with. I think it's important that these community boards is a great place for potential leaders in our community to come through, to learn the process involved in being responsible leaders in their community, but also I think for those interest groups as well. We are coming into an exciting part where there's more awareness from all communities on how they need to be represented themselves as they are seen in the current local landscape. They are not represented. Are we giving the future leaders in our community a chance to just fit into different areas? Because some of them may not want to be councillors, some of them may just want to be community board members, others may want to be leaders. So the question is, are we future-proofing this wonderful city of Lower Hutt and making sure that they're really well presented? But again, thank you so much for doing this report. It's important for us to look at ourselves and the roles that we have as leaders and to create something that's a better tomorrow for Lower Hutt as a city and as a council.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Semi. Is there any questions? Councillor Parkin, then Councillor Mitchell.
Kia ora. First of all, I'd like to acknowledge a potential conflict of interest here, given that it's dealing with my ward, but it has been raised by members of the public that it may logically make more sense to put Korokoro within Western Ward as part of the Hills. How do you think, or how do you obviously personally feel about that? You can't talk about that as a board at the moment, but...
It has been raised in the past, Councillor. Historically, Korokoro has always been part of Petone, irrespective of community boards, because that was our water supply area. So it's always been closely tied with Petone. And for that reason, I think, and also the keeping populations in order, that's why it has remained with Petone, or with Harbour Ward, as opposed to Western Ward. So I think it's that historic link. And it would be nice to keep that. I mean, it's referred to as Petone Heights by some of us, but yeah, I think it's important to keep that historical link with Harbour Ward and therefore the community board area.
Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you. Mike, you mentioned that the Harbour Ward councillor would be disadvantaged not to be supported by community boards. Do you feel that our other ward councillors have been disadvantaged for the last 35 years by not being supported by community boards?
Again, it comes back to the amount of issues facing that particular ward. In my view, yes, in some cases, yes. And I believe that if all parts of the city had a community board, it would be advantageous both to those communities and to help those councillors work more efficiently, perhaps take some of the load off, act as greater advocates and eyes and ears for them. So, yeah, I think there has been a disadvantage. You could argue that when there were community committees, they fulfilled those roles, but then you had the issue that they were appointed, not elected, et cetera, et cetera. So I think the equitable solution would be have boards in all areas.
Any other questions? Councillor Dyer.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Eastbourne Community Board submission questioned the process and sort of the input they had into meeting with the panel. How do you feel about Petone Community Board's involvement with the panel and your discussions with them directly?
We again met with the board just round table, had the opportunity to speak with them, knowing that I guess also as individuals we may have been in other groups that they consulted with. I personally wasn't. I'm not sure off the top of my head whether other board members might have been. But I guess knowing that their report would go out for consultation and that there would be much wider public involvement and our chance to see what form they took with their deliberations. Yes, perhaps it might have been nice to have more time with them, but they had a timetable they had to work to. So I think it was adequate.
Deputy Mayor Lewis.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Semi, a question for you, and it's in your capacity as a Pacific Islander, because in the report it mentions that the panel was advised that structures such as community boards or panels failed to respond adequately to specific needs of Pacific aspirations of the community. Have you found that personally? You know, how have you found it in your role as a community board member?
I think if that's where the panel see themselves, because it is a culture that looks after itself. And so, like many of our ethnic communities, reaching out to, I guess, our local representatives is where they sometimes go inward and support themselves. So maybe the right question wasn't asked about that in terms of how they feel supported in that space. We have so many of our communities that are working in hospitals, are working in sports organisations, those grassroots communities. So we find that a lot of especially Pacific families are doing it themselves. And there's an opportunity for us. I think what it's telling us, that report, is that a bigger light needs to be shone in that space, not just, and I'm not saying it not just, whereby it's an exercise that we engage with them. As a principal, I'm sure you've seen families having to come up with their own resources, and it is hard for them to say, we need help in those spaces. So I think it's a great light to put on there, but I think more importantly is knowing they have a door that they can knock on. I think that's the most important bit, is having a door that they can knock on and someone will say, Mike, you know Island guy, please can you go and talk to him? Yeah, and that's where the connection of the community comes into it. Yeah, as I mentioned earlier on, the question is, are we building platforms to lift our communities? You know, we're going to have some great leaders come out of this, and are we building platforms for them to actually jump on, become great leaders for us? So thank you for your question.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to now move on to item 5, which is the item 4, which is conflict of interest declarations. Do we have any conflict of interest for members to declare? Just our usual. Yep. Deputy Mayor Lewis, E.B. Marina. Yep. Okay. Moving through to item 5, which is adoption of the long-term plan, and this is on page 7 of your agenda. I'd like to invite Richard Hardy and the team to come. Wendy. Is it Wendy?
Yeah.
Both are. And we also have John Whittle from, who's the Audit Director from Audit New Zealand, to speak to this item. Okay, I'll pass it over to you, Wendy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and councillors.
If you just move that mic just towards you, so yeah, a bit closer. There we go. Just,
I'll move closer.
there we go.
Yeah.
Go on.
Thank you. As the Mayor noted, my name is Wendy Bowther, Head of Corporate Planning. I'm here to present the final long-term plan to Council for adoption and for you to receive the audit opinion from our auditor, John Whittle. Firstly, I want to acknowledge the collaborative effect of various officers and teams across the whole organisation in getting us to where we are today. There have been some significant challenges to work through, and that has required a massive team effort. I'd particularly also like to recognise the input of the public through the consultation and hearings process, because that has helped us shape this long-term plan. As you know, the process started in May last year when councillors workshopped their priorities. Public consultation in April saw our largest ever response rate from the community for a long-term or annual planning process. And this was reflected in the hearings held in mid-May when over 100 people came to speak directly with you. After considering the feedback, on June the 4th, you made final decisions that officers have now worked into this final document. Our team implemented a robust process to incorporate your feedback and carefully review the text and financial information for accuracy. Thank you also for the further councillor feedback that was received up until today's meeting, particularly around quotations that we used in the what we heard sections and some of the graphs. We have made those changes into the final document now. Subject to council adoption, we will issue a press release today. Following this, we will capture any final amendments to the long-term plan that come through, and then this will be made available on by the 30th of July on our website. Finally, we will close the loop with the people who submitted on the long-term plan by providing them with a summary of what we heard from the community and the final decisions that you made. I would now like to hand over to John Whittle from Audit New Zealand to present the audit opinion.
Thank you, Wendy. Kia ora, Mayor Barry, councillors and officials. We have completed our work and are ready to issue an opinion subject to council's adoption of the plan. The audit opinion was also presented to the Audit and Risk Subcommittee on Tuesday, and we worked through each of the items. Probably the main points to note would be that we intend to issue a qualified opinion. But besides the impact of the possible impacts of the matters that we describe in that paragraph, that we believe the plan provides for a reasonable basis for the long-term decision making and coordination of council's resources, accountability to the community, that the information and assumptions that underlie the forecast information are reasonable, and that the reporting in terms of the financial and prudence regulations are complete and accurate. What the opinion doesn't cover is that we don't provide any assurance that the plan will actually be achieved, because situations change as can be expected, and those variations may be material. And we also don't guarantee the accuracy of any information in the plan, as it's forecast information. The only other point that I'd note in terms of the audit report is the responsibilities of council and the auditor, and probably the key one there is that council is responsible for meeting all the legal requirements affecting its procedures, decisions, consultation and disclosures, other than the actions relating to the preparation of the plan. In addition to the qualification item, the audit report also includes two emphases of matter. These are largely similar to what we included at the consultation document audit report. The first one deals with the relative increase in the size of the capital program and the uncertainties in achieving such a large program and the knock-on effects that could have with levels of service and costs if those are delayed. And the other emphasis of matter deals with the basis for council's preparing its renewals forecast for this 10-year period on an aged basis. So that creates an uncertainty in terms of those renewals. The first part being that it was limited in terms of what was presented by Wellington Water as the level of investment required. So one council has limited it in terms of what is affordable, but without additional condition information to support those renewals, there's uncertainty as to whether those would be the required ones or additional renewals would be required over this period.
Thank you, Wendy. Thank you, John. Is there any questions for either or both? No? Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, so we'll move through to the recommendations, and these are on page 7 of your agenda. That is recommendations 1 through to 8. I'll move them. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Dyer. Any discussion? Councillor Stallinger.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Important day at the end of a long process, one that I've really enjoyed. It's been challenging, some tough times, I suppose, in terms of difficult decisions, but I do again congratulate everyone involved. The councillors are well aware of my position on a few matters, which I took a different point of view than most others. I'm not going to repeat those now, but it does make me a bit difficult to decide how to vote in the final thing. My position does remain unchanged from my comments at previous meetings, but today councillors, or the council has passed essentially what final decisions on the majority of matters that go into the plan, so I do take that into account. And now what I've decided to do, just so you're aware, Mr. Mayor, is I will support the final LTP approval now. I think that just shows respect to all the hard work that's gone in, councillors, staff, auditors and others. But I'll just express my disagreement with some things, particularly the rates in relation to the next report. So I will vote against that, albeit recognising that flows from the LTP. I just thought that was perhaps the most appropriate place to just record my point of difference, rather than essentially appearing to reject the whole document, which, as I've expressed, I support in the large majority. So thank you.
Any other comments? Councillor Dyer.
Yeah, thank you. I will be supporting the document that's in front of us, and I'll also be supporting the next paper, which is actually funding this document. There's been some significant cost increases that have come to us since we published this draft LTP. And I want to use the word surprised, but I'm not surprised because we have such an awesome team here, but I am really surprised that we are still sticking with the 16.9% increase that we said we would go out for when we set the draft, and also keeping our balanced budget at the same time frame that we went out with. So I just really want to commend the team for the amazing work they've done behind the scenes. Implementing some of the really challenging decisions we've had to make through the last year to create this LTP. 16.9% is still a huge increase. But I think back to that very first meeting we had in May where Jenny told us we were looking at a 30-something% rate increase, just based on cost escalations, based on all those cost of living costs that are going up for everyone across the board, organisations and households. And our starting point was 30-point-something%, and we've brought it back to 16.9. So while that doesn't make the pain of an increase any more palatable for our households, it is worth just remembering that we're struggling just like everyone else is. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Briggs, then Councillor Shaw.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. For me, this has been the hardest long-term plan or annual plan process that I've been involved in. Our communities have been facing more and more complex challenges. Financial pressures on businesses and on households is being felt in real terms every day and every week. So I still think the plan that we went out with in draft was a fair plan, and also we've made adaptations based on community feedback. I want to thank everyone that's participated in the process. It takes all of those voices to get us to the best outcome possible. Thank you to the staff. This is over a year and a half worth of work to get to this point, and it's significant the hours and energy and effort that goes into this. Thank you to my colleagues for your support and listening and engagement in our community alongside me as well. The last thing I want to say is that, this plan actually reflects the priorities of our city. It's trying to get the things done that we know need to get done. It's not putting our head in the sand and ignoring the challenges that our city faces and our people are needing to tackle as well. It's going to get harder as well. Like I foresee in 3 years' time, the next long-term plan's not going to get easier for the council of the day. But hopefully what we've laid is a path that's going to be supportive for them to make the next hard decisions rather than making them harder for them.
Councillor Shaw.
Well, we finally arrived at this really difficult place, and it has been difficult for quite a while now. Excuse me. There's no doubt that the infrastructure and transport challenges have impacted on the final calculations, but like everyone else here, I want to thank the staff, Joe, Jenny, Wendy, and many others for the high level of detail provided to us over many briefings and meetings to help us with our decision. Look, we've got a responsibility to do what's right for the city as a whole, and despite the apprehension felt for those who will struggle with the increased rate demand, it's a decision that hasn't been taken lightly and one that must be done. So thank you for the staff, all the work provided.
Councillor Tupou.
Thank you, Your Worship. As a sort of first-term councillor, this is my first LTP exercise, and it's been a very educational exercise. We wish we can do everything on our wish list, but it's not always possible. So as Councillor Briggs mentioned, we have to make the difficult decisions in the current climate. Recent satisfaction surveys show that the community expect a high service delivery. And so my thoughts have been with our frontline staff and all those who are doing the mahi to deliver those wellbeing services that we offer right across the board. So balancing budget with the wellbeing and the values that we each come onto council to uphold on behalf of our residents. So just want to thank all the council officers for their hard work and colleagues for supporting me along this process. Kia ora.
Great. Anyone else wish to speak? No? Okay. Just to make a couple of final comments, and I certainly agree with all of the comments that have been made from councillors in acknowledging the work that has gone on through this entire process. It has felt like quite a long time when we go back to probably July last year, so nearly a year in preparing this long-term plan. And I think the efforts of our officials and the free and frank advice, the work in going line by line through the budget on where we can avoid costs, where we can make savings, putting those challenging questions to us around priorities and what we do and what we don't do as a council as well, has all been challenging, but in my mind, incredibly rewarding to get to this point where I think we have landed on a budget and a long-term plan that we can be proud of in a very, very challenging environment. I would say the highlight for me is that focus on water and transport investment in our capital program. $2.7 billion we're investing over the next 10 years. That is a significant uplift, and it's a significant uplift from already a large uplift in our last long-term plan because we recognise the underinvestment that has occurred over a long period of time. And that is not a Lower Hutt story, that is a New Zealand story. And it is a story that needs to be solved through changes led by central government alongside us in how we fund and finance vital infrastructure investment and do that better in this country. So I'm very pleased that we've been able to put that as our absolute focus within this plan, as well as dealing to really important, once in a generational opportunities with the likes of Te Waitaka Māori, Te Awa Karangi, Riverlink, and other projects across our city as well. So that has certainly been a highlight for myself. But thank you to everyone. I think the debate throughout has been incredibly respectful, and it's great to be able to finally get to today. So I'll put it to the vote. All those in favour say aye. Those against no. I declare that carried unanimously. Okay. We'll now move to item 6, which is the setting of the rates, and that is on page 19. And we have Alicia Andrews. Welcome, Alicia. Any comments you'd like to make, and then we'll open it up for questions.
No comments. I'll take the paper as read. Happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? No? Okay. Now, we'll move to the recommendations. Recommendation that Council resolves to set the rates and add penalties to unpaid rates during the 24-25 rating year by passing the resolution attached as Appendix 1 to the report. Okay, so seconded by Councillor Briggs. Any discussion? Councillor Stallinger.
I guess it's me. I won't repeat what I said at the last one, but I do want to make some comments, and I wouldn't have made them if it were not for Councillor Briggs giving me a 5-minute lecture at our last meeting on the subject, which had a very different tone to what he said today when he respected the contribution of others. He certainly disrespected me on that occasion at great length. He wasn't speaking to the meeting. He spoke directly to me in a way which was quite offensive. I kind of brushed it off a bit because it didn't really make a lot of sense. But I do think I need to clarify that. Him giving me a lecture in financial management with our relative experiences is no more sensible than me giving that councillor a lecture in his use of te reo, or giving Councillor Parkin a lecture in his contribution on matters scientific. Not a sensible thing to do, and a lead into embarrassment, I would say. The councillor compared my contribution to discussions around rates is of someone who went to a restaurant, ordered everything off the menu, and then refused to pay, leaving it to others to foot the bill. It was a strange thing to say. It was almost as if it was written by some other person on some other day, because only shortly before his speech, I voted against something which added several % to the rates, and he somehow didn't seem to appreciate that. I felt he was a bit confused, I suppose. And then we heard a lengthy calculation quoting information that councillor had never been provided with, and magically concluding that trimming a little bit off the top of what is a large contribution to increased personnel costs would somehow magically result in the need to dismiss 2 entire divisions of council staff. It simply didn't make sense. I've heard this kind of argument in a much more articulate way before, and actually got a name for it. I call it the sacred cow. It's when someone who wants to protect a level of funding pulls out the sacred cow and says, I'll have to slaughter this if you touch what I have. In the past, councils have actually banned the use of that approach when staff have said, oh, look, if you touch my budget, the first thing on the chopping block is Moira Library or Mackenzie Pool. It's not helpful. Councillor Briggs may not have noticed that our staff are more than capable of finding ways to mitigate rates increases, and have done so on several occasions during this process. Perhaps the one which stood out to me recently, because it was unexpected, was when we heard of a $90 million or thereabouts variance or shortfall in our funding for water capex because of an error. We know, based on other times when we've had big capital variances, that it does add to our rates. Considering the depreciation and interest alone on some 90 million would put about 5% extra on our rates across the LTP period. But that didn't happen. We didn't have that rates increase. It's because of the good work of our staff, who found ways of modifying the timing of projects and the amount of capital delivery and so on. And like magic, we didn't need that 5% rates increase. So I congratulate the staff for that. It was a very effective and good way of managing a difficult situation late in our process. Coincidentally, I recall suggesting that perhaps we have a 5% reduction in rates phased in over the LTP period. I was told, you know, that's not possible. It wasn't fair. But yet here we see something similar has actually happened without any direction from councillors, including myself. So again, congratulations for the staff for that. And I'm sure Councillor Briggs is pleased to know that all divisions of council staff are still present, despite that those changes which were put through. So, look, I will be voting against this, as I explained before, and I'm sure our citizens are going to be pleased to know that, you know, under personal attacks from the likes of Councillor Briggs, I'm going to stick to my guns and vote as I see fit. I'll continue to call it as I see it, as I've done through these debates. I'm trying to do so with respect. And it was a bit unfortunate that I had to respond to the councillors' comments at a later date. I had no right of reply when they were raised last time. And I think it's good to put that aside, I suppose, now. I feel like I've given his response, but I will be voting against the rates increase. Just reiterating that in the large majority, I see them as necessary for all the reasons we've discussed, but at the margins, I don't think we've done enough to mitigate them. Thank you.
Okay, we'll go to Councillor Parkin first, then we'll go to Councillor Briggs.
Kia ora. I will be voting for this rates increase. It is necessary. As Councillor Stallinger raised, we have the ability to absorb some cost increases, but unfortunately, I think in this case, I would respectfully say that Councillor Stallinger has actually misinterpreted or misremembered the information. My understanding of the information that we were given from Wellington Water is that that $90 million saving was done by putting off projects. And we are in this situation of having a significant rates increase because we have put off projects in the past. Not just, as Mayor Barry has said, not just a Wellington or Lower Hutt based issue, but a national issue. We do have the responsibility to our ratepayers to spend our money as cost effectively and as economically and as effectively as we can. However, we also bear the brunt if we don't do that and we don't make the investments where they are needed. At the moment, a significant portion of our funding is going into water and our water supply, both in terms of delivering fresh water, removing wastewater, and dealing with flood and stormwater. We're not actually on top of dealing with our flood and stormwater. We are treading water when it comes to dealing with the water supply. The issues are not going to get easier, and by putting off that 90 mil, yes, we keep the rates down, but we will pay that price in the future. And while we can make those savings, and those are the decisions that we have to make as a governance board, they are going to come with consequences in the future. And as I said, I will be voting for this. It is difficult. It is, as a first-term councillor, Councillor Morgan's mentioned on a number of times, this is not an ideal situation to come into. There are lots of things that I would have loved to see continue to be able to be done, but we have to make those compromises and we have to do what's best for the city.
Councillor Briggs.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Happy to respond to Councillor Stallinger's comments. First and foremost, I stand by my previous comments in the previous meeting. And Councillor, I was also very courteous to yourself and was polite, even while interrupted. Today, as you may have noticed, I stayed quiet and listened to your comment because I wanted to hear what you had to say. Interesting also that you kind of put my comment as being a 5-minute lecture. Hopefully you learned a couple of things during the lecture as well, because today it's really important to note that I still stand by, if you're going to put items in the basket, contribute towards the bill, you need to be contributing towards paying it as well. It's significant, the cost that our community is facing. It's significant, these rates. It's the best that we can do at this point in time for our city. So yes, there's a political price to paying for the items that we've all contributed towards the order. So if you find that offensive, that I'm naming the fact that you're willing to dine and dash, well, that's your choice to feel offended. But I stand by those comments. I'm not going to mince my words. I'm not going to sit back and vote against a rates increase for the budget of all the items that we all just voted for unanimously. That's ridiculous. So I'm happy to stand by what I've said. I acknowledge that you've been offended. Hopefully we can talk afterwards, but agree to disagree on the fact that we need to pay for the things that we put in the basket and we add to the order.
Thank you. I would say that both both councillors have been around this table in a number of roles over a number of years and would have seen some pretty robust debates around the table. And I would say that the comments both ways are pretty tame, in my view, when I look back over the last 10 years. I know there's a number of officials in the room who have been here for a while who would agree with that. So thank you very much, everyone. We'll put it to the vote. All those in favour say aye. Those against no. Declare that carried. Okay. Thank you. Recorded? Yep, sure. Councillor Stallinger and Councillor Barrett against. Okay, moving through to item 7, which is the development contribution remissions and rebates for community housing providers on page 44 of the agenda. Okay, Dwayne Fletcher, welcome. Any comments you'd like to make?
Kia ora koutou, good evening, Mr Mayor and councillors. Just very briefly, on the 17th of May, you met and put aside provisionally $500,000 a year to help provide remissions for registered community housing providers for DCs. And this policy is intended to help guide how that is applied. At that meeting, one of the things you discussed is not only where a chip is a developer, but where a chip is buying from a developer. And so the policy tries to provide for that by offering a rebate, a return of development contributions paid should they meet certain requirements, but is intended to try and reflect the same kind of remission the policy proposes for where chips are developers. Just one point to note is it's a new policy and the government are making changes to the way they fund social housing and potentially community housing providers in the future. So at some point in the future, we're intending to come back to you and let you know if any of those changes we think ought to be reflected in an altered policy. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Dwayne. Any questions? No, we'll move through to the recommendations, which is 1 through to 3. Page 44, I'll move them. Do I have a seconder? Deputy Mayor Lewis, any discussion? All those in favour say aye. Those against no. Declare that carried. Thank you, Dwayne. Appreciate it. Is this the last time we'll see you? Oh, he's gone.
For a while.
For a little while? Okay, well, thank you for all your work, Dwayne, so appreciate it. Item 8, parking, implementation of long-term plan CBD parking decisions. We've got Paul Hewitt, Head of Transport, and also John Kingsbury here as well. So over to you, Paul. Any comments you'd like to make, and then we'll open it up.
Kia ora koutou. This report just seeks approval in accordance with the Hutt City Council's traffic bylaws 2017 for the existing paid parking in the CBD to be extended to paid parking from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. 7 days per week from the 1st of July. Specifically, this is for the parking zones HC2, HC3, HC4 and Riverbank.
Through you, Mr Mayor, kia ora councillors. So this is just, we have gone through the long-term plan and you've already seen these numbers and approved this in principle. This is the bylaws that we need to go through to actually be able to implement from next Monday. So.
Okay. Any questions from members? Councillor Dyer and then Councillor Stallinger.
Thank you. I'm not sure if you've got the questions I sent through earlier, but I'll just repeat them just in case. The first one was in the appendix. It used the wording for the new zone conditions, 2-hour maximum parking duration outside of signposted restrictions. Just wondering if you could clarify exactly what that means. Does that mean outside of Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, the 2-hour maximum parking would, so overnight, you won't be able to park overnight in HC2?
Thanks, Councillor. Through you, Mr Chair. So, yeah, no, that is generally it's parked same as it is in Wellington. As soon as the meters switch off, it's P120.
And then what's our time frame for review, the wider parking review that we are looking at undertaking?
Through you, Mr Chair. So we're talking about the actual parking policy work. So that'll be coming back. Richard might be able to answer that. So we can provide some more information on that following. So.
Thank you. And then my next question was, have we factored in the Riverlink disruption and the temporary closure of the Riverbank car park into our financial forecasts that are in the plan?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So yes, we're well aware of the closure. We're also looking, though, as part of the Riverlink parking management plan around alternate sites. So we will be losing a significant number of parks for a period of time, but we're looking at sites, for example, some of the buildings that have been demolished where we own that land, how many car parks we can get there, and in other places as well. So yes.
And then the final one I had was just what's the rationale for keeping the 2-hour limit in the HC2 shopper zone? Now that it's paid, obviously that's the disincentive to stay there for longer than you need to because you're paying for it 7 days a week. Was there any thought to maybe extending how long you could actually stay parked there shopping for?
Thanks, Councillor. Consistency. So part of the problem with having multiple different zones, HC1, 5, 10, whatever they are, is that they all had different, up until the last couple of years, they were all inconsistent in terms of price and how long. So this is, in the paid zone, which, as we know, is not actually a great part. I mean, it is the bulk of the CBD, but there's also unpaid parking on the outside. Regardless of where you are in that area, the cost is the same, and you don't have to pay $1 on this street and $2 on the next street, for example, or 2 hours and 3 hours. So.
And then one final one, sorry, just going back to the first question around the overnight limits. Is it currently that, or are we changing it to that? Are you currently allowed to park overnight in the CBD, and now you will no longer be able to?
Yeah, from my understanding, it's still park 120 overnight, but so there's no change in that.
Any other questions? Oh, sorry, yes, Councillor Salinger.
I'm interested in officers' comments about the practicality of reviewing the impact of the changes in, say, 12 months' time. It is quite a big change. Perhaps for a lot of businesses it won't make that much of a difference, but I'm wondering about, someone deciding to go for a coffee. Do they go to the Hutt CBD and pay $3, $4 or whatever for parking when they could go to Janus Bakery or somewhere else outside of the CBD and effectively get their coffee for quite a lot cheaper by avoiding the parking. Sorry, a bit of a long-winded example, but I'm just wondering if you see any merits in reviewing the impact, perhaps in terms of turnover, retail turnover, or vacant shops down the track.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, Councillor. Take your point on board. We can do that. It's going to be difficult to be able to differentiate between what is a Riverlink impact and what is a parking impact. But we will be monitoring throughout, but more than willing to come back. So once we've got that final Riverlink parking management plan and we've presented to councillors the Riverlink program and the area and the impacts and what we're doing about them, then that would be the time to go. Once things have started, what does that look like sort of 12 months down the track?
Can I suggest we sort of take that one offline and just like, as you've said, John, maybe roll that into a bit of a understanding of impacts on the CBD generally, but I think factoring that in, but we can take that through Councillor Edwards' committee. Councillor Edwards, you've got a question?
Yeah, probably an entirely impractical sort of question, but I'm quite worried. July 1st is not very far away, and I'm sure there's a lot of people still unaware that we're doing this and will be very much caught by surprise in terms of weekend parking and parking on the riverbank for the Saturday market. A lot of people come from out of town. Is there any way that we can sort of, in weekends and riverbanks, sort of give warnings for the first week or put up signs at least on the riverbank car park on the 2 entry points that parking charges now apply?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, Councillor. So there has been quite a bit of advertising around these changes to come up. People are aware that from Monday this will be occurring. The existing signage will all be updated, but we can also, I'm not sure exactly the level of new signage that's going in on the riverbank market, but that's something we can certainly look at as well. We also have a text message service for people who pay a
a monthly fee at the Riverbank car park, then they will be getting messaging if they haven't already. I think they already have, just alerting them of that.
Councillor Dyer.
Yeah, I had similar thoughts to Councillor Stallinger around the review, but also considering the changes in Petone as well. It'd be good if that could be included in that.
Okay, no other questions? Go through the recommendations 1 through to 10. Do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Edwards, any discussion? All those in favour say aye. Those against no, declare that carried. Moving through to Seaview Marina's statement of intent, page 64 of the agenda. So Tim Lidgard, welcome. And do we have Peter here as well? No? He's sailing overseas. No. Okay. Okay, great. And your line as well, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Peter is an apology for today. He does extend his thanks to everyone that was involved in putting this document together.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would like to present the final SOI for Seaview Marina Limited for the 3-year commencing 1st of July 2024. The draft SOI was presented in March 2024. Notes the changes made to the final SOIs as outlined in paragraphs 6 to 16 contained in this report. The 10-year plan attached as Appendix 2 to this report. Now I would like to pass on to Tim.
Thank you, Mayor and councillors, for the opportunity to present this. This statement of intent mimics a lot of comment that I've already overheard so far this evening about challenges, and we certainly had our share putting together a document that landed on a fair compromise across all stakeholders. I think we have an opportunity over the next 3 years to really begin to know our customer and understand them, focusing on service delivery and just the fundamental principles of customer service. We will be embarking on a number of years of investment to bring the facility to execute its half-life refurbishment, and this is what's presented in the document in front of you.
Thank you. Any questions from members? Councillor Dyer.
Yeah, just wonder if you had any comments around paragraph 8 that says that the liveaboard and ramp revenue have not met expectations in the current financial year, and this has been reflected in the SOI. Do you think that's as a result? Yeah, just keen to hear your thoughts why you think those things are down on what you...
The ramp revenue is quite a simple one. We haven't had great weather. And the liveaboard revenue is attributed to a slight budgeting error in the prior year.
Any other questions? No? Okay. Move through to the recommendations, which is 1 through to 5. And of course, this is agreeing to the final statement of intent. So I'll move that. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Morgan. Sorry, Councillor Morgan. And any discussion? Councillor Stallinger.
Just a quick comment. I think it's a good plan. I'm pleased to support it. The only thing I'm slightly concerned of is the dividend policy, and I know it's been reduced in terms of the expectations we had previously, but I do see that the dividends payable are in excess of the forecast profits after tax for a few years. So I'm not suggesting a change or anything at this stage, or I would have raised it previously, but I do just wonder when we're next considering this, whether a thought may be given by our staff to having a policy which equates to a certain percentage of profits each year being paid as a dividend rather than a fixed amount. Just a suggestion for the future. Thank you.
Yep. Any other comments? All those in favour say aye. Those against no. Declare that carried. Thank you, Tim. Really appreciate it. Okay. Now moving through to Urban Plus, and we've got, is Daniel here? Ah, Daniel, you're here. Daniel Moriarty and Pamela Bell. Great to have you both here. And we've also got Yao Long as well, so I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would like to present the final SOI for Urban Plus Group for the 3-year commencing 1st of July 2024. The draft SOI was presented in March 2024. Notes the changes made to the final SOI as outlined in paragraphs 6 to 11 of this report. A 10-year projection for Urban Plus Group attached as Appendix 2 to this report. Now I would like to pass on to Dan.
Chair Lang, thanks, Mr. Mayor, Deputy Mayor and councillors. Hopefully you can hear me all well. Just wanted to thank everyone who has had input into this, especially Yao Lang and Darren from the Hutt City Council Financial Side of Life, John Kingsbury and his team, and also my officers. So looking forward to carrying on our projects into next year and doing more. Thank you.
Anything you'd like to say, Pamela?
Thanks. I would like to, of course, reiterate Daniel's thanks for everybody who's helped us bring this 3-year SOI to you. And also just to let the council know that last week we had both a board meeting and a strategy session and clearly identified some really interesting opportunities and challenges in the current environment. So I know that word pivot has been overused, but I just want to let you all know that we're absolutely working out how to make lemonade rather, from the current environment of lemons. We have a lot of projects coming on stream, and you would have seen some really great media that Hutt City has been supporting and driving. So I hope you can all see the great work around the Homestar, the accessible, and the apprentices work to deliver broader outcomes. So yeah, there's a lot of really good, great news stories. That's what I'd say. So thanks to the councillors who have come out and supported us in those endeavours.
No, thank you very much. And just on behalf of the council, keep up the good work. And I think it's been great to be able to share those stories of the fantastic initiatives that you guys have been driving. So for all of us to be able to share that has been fantastic. But is there any questions from councillors? Councillor Stanger?
Again, I do congratulate the company and Seaview Marine. I didn't mention it before for all that they've been achieving, and there's been some great results. I have noticed and commented perhaps in the past and just continue to observe the fluidity of the forecasts. No doubt that's a reflection of the market and opportunities as they come and go, and timing variations and when projects can be delivered. So I understand that. It's pleasing to see over the next few years there's some big sizable profits coming through, which will no doubt help the company achieve its wider objectives that council has set together with the board. I just do notice beyond the first 3 years, there's not a lot of net surplus being generated. And I wonder whether that's a result of conservative forecasting or uncertainty as to what opportunities may arise. I'm just interested if Chair Pamela or Dan have some comments on that. Thank you.
I can answer that. A bit of all of the above, Councillor Stellinger. Just with the volatility of the market, as well as the opportunities in terms of land and also the uncertainty of chip funding and their availability to partner with us in the long term. It's a dilemma that every chip will let you know about. So yeah, there is sort of that fluidity, as you mentioned. That's purely down to being able to secure projects and looking out past the 3 to 5 to even 7 or 10 year mark. It really becomes somewhat of a plug number or a plug project until we really get down to it. So I would love to be able to program 10 years out, but with the land being as it is, it's just can't do that. But thank you.
Any other questions? No? Okay, so I'll move the recommendations. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Stallinger, any discussion? All those in favour say aye. Those against no. Declare that carried. Thank you. Representation review, report and initial proposal. So I'd like to ask Olivia Miller to come forward and also Paul Swain as our chair of the Independent Representation Review panel. And any comments you'd both like to make, of course, and if you'd like to touch on some of the comments from our public comment as well, that would be great, and then we can open it up for questions. Olivia.
Kia ora koutou. I'll just be providing a few brief comments, and then we'll be answering any questions you have. So beside me is the chair of the independent panel, Paul Swain, and also for answering questions we have Shelley Baskand, who is the acting engagement lead for comms and engagement. So just as a bit of background for this work, in July of last year, Council appointed an independent panel to engage with communities of interest in the city to review representation arrangements to ensure that communities are fairly and effectively represented by Council. The purpose of this report is to present the initial representation proposal for approval. So Paul presented the panel's report and recommendations at a councillor briefing on the 19th of June. The report is attached as Appendix 1. It includes extensive discussion and analysis of the options the panel considered in determining effective and fair representations arrangements for communities of interest in Te Ao Karangi ki Tai Lower Hutt. Officers have reviewed the panel's report and recommendations and consider that it presents a comprehensive approach to engagement and includes robust analysis of the feedback received. The panel engaged with a wide range of communities of interest, including mana whenua and Matawaka, and brought their experience and expertise to the process. So upon review of the recommendations, officers have made 3 very minor changes to the wording of the panel's recommendations, which is to better align with the guidance of the Local Government Commission. So the first minor change is on page 187, paragraph 1C, which is to include general in the ward's name's title. So Northern Ward becomes Northern General Ward. Similarly, in just the paragraph, the one down, paragraph 1D, the second minor change is to include Māori Ward in the Māori Ward's title. So the official title becomes Mana Karangi ki Tai Māori Ward. And the final minor change is paragraph 2A on the same page, which is to separate out the reference to increasing the number of councillors from 12 to 13. So very, very minor technical changes there. Our officers consider this initial proposal represents the results of robust and comprehensive review process undertaken in accordance with the Local Electoral Act. As such, officers recommend that the initial proposal at Appendix 2 is approved today for public consultation. In terms of next steps, from here, it will be publicly notified this Monday. It will then go out for public consultation, which will run from 1st of July through to 1st of August. There's a full communications and engagement plan attached as Appendix 3, but just really briefly, it will be in the Hutt News, it will be on our website, we'll do a media release, social media, we'll be engaging, touching back with those who were engaged with earlier in the process, and officers are finalising the details of holding drop-in sessions with affected communities around the city. Time for hearings, if they're needed, has been allocated on the 26th and 27th of August. And following the public consultation, the recommendations will come back to full council for consideration on the 10th of September. Thank you.
Thank you, Olivia. Okay, pass it over to Paul.
O tihei mauri ora, te rauku nei, tēnā koutou katoa. Mayor Barry and councillors, thanks for the opportunity to present the report and the recommendations. There are a couple of controversial things in here, obviously, and perhaps I could just address a couple of those and then open it up for questions. I think you've had the chance now, fortunately, to read the report and might have additional questions then during the time of the briefing. Just a little minor thing. Oh, good catch by the officers, by the way. A couple of errors there. Yeah, you know, you've got some good officers here. There's no doubt about that. A minor issue was raised last at the briefing session, which was on the unequal number of councillors per ward, as I recall. Because you'll recall we're suggesting an expanded northern and central ward, which would allow 2 councillors in both those wards and 1 everywhere else. We did some further work on that on the basis of that question and found that across the country there are about 53 councils who have a ward-based system. And of those, about 80% of them have an unequal basis of councillors. And that, by and large, reflects the fact that communities of interest differ in size, and the plus or minus 10% rule, therefore, cuts in to make sure that you've got to try and get an average representation per councillor. So I just thought that might give a little bit more comfort for those who are a bit concerned about the fact that there might be some issues raised about the number of councillors and the unequal nature of that. Can I pick up the issues of the community board, because that's the second issue, clearly, that that will be the subject of much debate and discussion. Can I just acknowledge the contributions today from Bruce, Senny and Mike, and just touch on them very briefly. Mike raised the opportunity for consulting on this, and that's precisely the point of this. We bring forward our report and recommendations. If you were able to take it out to consultation, hear what the communities say, and in the end you have the ability to determine the final proposal. You are the final arbiter in this, and what we wanted to make sure there was a robust opportunity for people to look at some of the issues that maybe haven't been looked at for a while, and to give their opinion on it. So I think it's a good proposal, and Mike is absolutely right on that. Senny makes the point about trying to tap into communities that are potentially hard to tap into. I agree with him totally on that, and that was actually the focus really of much of our work on the panel. We all know that there are many voices in this community that aren't heard for a whole pile of reasons, and part of the report was looking at how do you tap into those, and certainly the section 10, which is not part of the formal recommendations, gives a sort of a list of ideas that we had about how you might go about that, and you can consider that at your own leisure at some further time. Can I just address Bruce's comments, and I think 3 points that I'd like to make. The first one is that the panel were very, very cautious about the percentages, numbers and responses in the survey. So it's important to know that this wasn't a referendum, it wasn't a poll, it was self-selecting, so it wasn't statistically valid. And if you look at page 44, as I recall the page number, you'll see that there's one particular demographic that is very overrepresented in responses. And so what we were trying to make sure is to say, well, look, that's a tool. There is some information there that is useful for us, but we're not relying completely on that. And it's important to make that point really right at the start. He does raise the issue, for example, of the Northern Ward, where they don't have community boards, and says, well, there was quite a lot of support for community boards up there. Also, interestingly, in the report, if you look at it, you find that their level of unfamiliarity with community boards is also very high. So there's a discrepancy, what we found in our discussions with various community groups about the nature of community boards. I think people feel that they're a good idea, and when you talk to people, you don't have a community board in your area, they think it's a good idea. I think when you talk about them, when you explain to them what community boards are responsible for, their levels of delegation and that sort of thing, they then start to have second thoughts. So I think there's what we found, a lot of misunderstanding in the community generally about community boards, a higher level of understanding clearly in the areas where community boards were, and you'd expect that, and we say that in the report. I think, secondly, Bruce, I think reads a lot more into the issue of a community agent than what the panel had intended, and maybe it wasn't written clearly enough for him to come to those conclusions. We never intended the community agents to replace elected community boards. The community agent idea came from discussions we had with a number of groups, particularly in the ethnic and migrant communities. And the idea of the community agent was to identify those communities of interest that are not reflective or represented in a lot of the discussion and debate that goes on. And it's not just in Hutt City Council, it's right across councils across the country and regional councils, which I've been on, and Parliament, which I've been in. It's the age-old problem of how do you engage with people who have not been able to be, or for one reason or another, been engaged. What we felt was that we should the communities of interest that have not been engaged include groups such as Pacific, as I think Senny mentioned, ethnic and migrant, youth, disabled, lots of groups that just can't find their way in through the system. And we thought that the community agent would be a useful way to do that. All of those communities have leaders, and all of those communities said that they wanted to be more engaged, and all of those communities said they had leaders who could act as a sort of a two-way person to provide information back to council and council back to the community. So we didn't see them holus bolus across all communities. We felt that they should be identified for those communities of interest that have not been, for one reason or another, engaged with in the past. So they certainly were not there to take the responsibility away from community boards and to replace community boards. And we make that point hopefully, well, now that I think about it, not as clearly as what it should have been in the last section of that chapter, chapter 10. The final point that I want to make is around the community boards across all wards, because that was an option that we did consider, and you'll see that in the report. I suppose the issue for us was that if you wanted to do that for the equity issue, because there are a number of people who have talked about the equity issue, that there are 2 in one ward, 1 in another, and none everywhere else. That was an issue that did come up. And so we did look at the whole issue of, could there be community boards across the rohi, as it were. It would mean, in order to be fair, you would need to disestablish the Petone and Eastbourne ones and have one for the Harbour ward, leave Wainui and create 3 more, was kind of the discussion that we had. But I think, if I can be frank, it would really require the council to sit and have a really good discussion with itself about what its commitment is to that community board structure. You know, maybe the report read that somehow they haven't been effective. Well, I think the reality is that they've been effective as they can be. And if you look at not just here, around the country, the councils have not treated them as effectively as they could have been. They could have been used, or could be used, a lot better and a lot more than what they have been. And certainly the levels of delegations, which I think was raised by maybe Mike, are very, very limited, very typical of all around the countryside. So I think the council, when we looked at it, we looked at whether the council was going to be in a position to be able to really look at that commitment and turn that commitment into action if you were going to have community boards right across the area. But it wasn't just a commitment; it's also a huge amount of effort that would need to go into to educate the community and promote the community boards. That would require what we said was considerable resources to do that, at a time when obviously resources are constrained. Part of that promotion education work would need to be looking at how to resolve the confusion there is out there between the role of councillors and the role of the community board. And it's important to acknowledge that the role of councillor is also to consult and engage, but ultimately to decide. And that was the thing that tipped us in our favour. Bruce is quite right in saying that we felt that a structure or a layer between the community and the council really was an approach that was taken maybe last century, but with communities being much more fluid and needing much more localised response, we felt that that kind of structure got in the way of that relationship between the community and councillors, and that the energy and effort that the council could put into, given the confusion that's already out there, is to be promoting the work not just of the council but of councillors generally, and to help lift the level of understanding and engagement there is across the community, and hence once again our section 10 in our report. So we've come forward with this report very carefully considered. We weighed up a lot of things. We had a lot of debates and lots of discussions and arguments, and I've raised the two that the two key ones that we just raised before. But I think ultimately, just to finish on where I began, is that the great thing about this process is that if you were to adopt these recommendations, which I highly recommend you do, then you can take that out to consultation, listen to what the community say. Did we get it right? You know, did we get the boards, the ward system right? Did we make the right call on the community boards? You'll be able to hear back from that, and in the end, you'll be able to take that into account when you come forward with your final proposal, which ultimately, as councillors, you are responsible for. So with that, Mr. Mayor, I'm very happy to take some questions.
Great, thank you. And I suppose just for councillors, this really is the opportunity to ask Paul Swain, as the chair of this report, any questions that you do have at this point in time, because they are more appropriately directed to the panel rather than to our own officials who really have facilitated the process. Indeed. More so than the content of the report. So, Councillor Briggs.
Firstly, thanks, Paul, to you and the panel. It's a great report. Is there anything from your perspective that didn't get done due to time and scope that you would have wanted to have achieved? Or did you kind of get all your bases covered from your perspective with the time that you had?
Well, I think the time we had, we mentioned it in the report, and I think we operated on what was called a best endeavours, because there'll always be people, as you know, there'll always be people who say, well, they did that report, but they never talked to me. And so, you know, it was on the basis of time. I think if we'd had a bit more time, maybe we could have gone out with some scenarios. You know, we could have done that. But really, the difficult issues sort of floated at us over time, which was sort of settling on the ward system, and then settling on the councillors. And so it was it was evolving and got more complicated as we went, and in the end probably ran out of time. We were consoled in the fact that if we'd gone out with scenarios, how much response we would have had to that. You know, given the response on these sorts of things, people are very focused on rates, but not particularly focused on representation structures, to be frank. But we did rely on the fact that this was going to go out for consultation, and there was the opportunity for people to have a say. And that was the key thing, that for people to be able to have a say on this report. And I think all the submitters who made comments at the start talked about that, and there will be plenty of opportunity for people to do that.
Councillor Stallinger, then Councillor Edwards.
Thank you. Must say, Paul, very impressed with your work and the supporting staff as well in coming through with this. I think it was a great decision by the council to go ahead with this process. And I've been around while there's been quite a few reviews, and I think this approach takes away the potential for political considerations of us to go into the mix before an option's produced, not just in reality, but also in terms of the perceptions, to have a really independent and quality panel such as we had. My question is just a simple one. The recommendation for 5 councillors, the number 5 elected at large, could you just speak a little bit to why that number is the right number in your view?
Sure. No such thing as simple questions. I think we started out by looking at the total number of councillors, and the general feeling we got, and that wasn't just from the survey, notwithstanding the caveats that I put in at the start about surveys, but the big advantage we had in our group consultation, our group chats, is that we were able to dig into this a lot more, and we were able to actually, get into the questions a lot more. There was no great enthusiasm for increasing the number of councillors, as you'd expect. But then again, interestingly, there was no great enthusiasm for reducing them, the number. I mean, when you explain to people what the roles and responsibilities of council were, some of them were quite surprised at the range of things that councils have to do, and felt that it was quite a big job, and therefore probably the number that was there is about right, remembering that there can be anywhere between 5 and 29, as I remember the figure. So then we had a look at, okay, so if the number 12 is about right, at the moment it's 6 and 6. So what did we do? We knew that there was going to be a Māori ward councillor, and so we could have done a number of things. We went from 6 to 7 ward councillors. So that left us with the opportunity really of having 5 at large or 4 at large with 1 Māori ward councillor, leaving the total at 12. Or we could have increased the number to 14 to keep it along the lines of what it is now. So in the end, we felt that for a whole pile of reasons, plus or minus 10% rule led us to the 7 councillors, ward councillors. Taking into account the Māori ward councillor, we still felt that the at-large system was really important, and we still felt that there were communities of interest across the city that needed attention and could be often represented by councillors who potentially are at large. And so we decided that we would basically reduce the at-large just by 1 rather than by 2, and not use the Māori ward to take another general ward councillor, at-large councillor off them. So really it's an art, not a science, I think was the answer. But I think we kept faith with those who said 12's about right, taking into account the additional decision the council had made about a Māori ward councillor. And so we ended up there, which we thought in the end, on balance, was the right number.
Councillor Edwards, then Councillor Barrett.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Your panel's obviously done some analysis of what happens in other jurisdictions in terms of representation. Did you notice any trend generally away from community boards in cities of our size, or more towards them? And the point was raised that local government commission has a theme on at the moment of localism.
No, we didn't. My understanding is that there are a number of councils, obviously, with them, particularly at the time of amalgamation in 1989. I'm not sure whether any have been removed. I'm not also sure whether any have been added to. I think it's been very much a status quo. From what I remember of our discussions, it's been very much a status quo since that time. But the answer to the question is no, we didn't do any full analysis of that.
Councillor Barrett.
Kia ora, Paul. Very extensive report. Look, I'm looking at page 187 and I'm taking on board your reply before Councillor Edwards. Central Ward seems a really, really large area, which covers a lot of the major business proportions in that area. I just wonder, was there any consideration at any time to having 3 councillors to cover that area?
Not really. You see, the way this works, which was all new to me, the way it works is that the plus or minus 10% rule basically just says that councillors should be representing about the average number of residents. So if we were to for example, increase the number to 3, that would reduce the average representation in the central ward of each councillor. And then you would start to have disparities. And that affects the plus or minus 10% because it's a relative measure. So the answer is no, we didn't. We felt that the central ward area, there was a lot of feeling around the fact that it's sort of part of the old Lower Hutt, if you were. Lots of people feeling more of an identity with that central area than with their own local area. So we did think that there was an opportunity to expand it. It needed 2, but if you went to 3, it's a bit like when I was younger, hitting a farmer's fence with a tractor. It unravels very quickly. And so what I think we needed to make sure was that the proportion of representation was right. And if you look at it, the only outlier is Wainuiomata. And we had a lot of discussion about that. But the reality is that it's very hard to try and deal with a plus or minus 10% rule in an area which is clearly its own distinct area. And we made that fact in the report because the Local Government Commission will presumably look at that.
Thank you. Councillor Mitchell, then Councillor Lewis.
Thank you for the report, and it's very thorough and quite a shake-up, so I'd just like to acknowledge that. It was a bit of a challenge we put in front of you, and it feels very much like a, I don't know, once in 35 years reset for Lower Hutt, what's proposed here. You did mention in the report and speaking to us today, I guess it's a challenge around lack of understanding of who does what around council and across community boards as well. So how big a task do you think we have in the next month or so to make sure people do understand those things before they tell us what kind of arrangement they want?
Well, it is a massive task, and the difficulty in any submission process is always time limited, and I understand that. There's a series of steps, you know, it has to be registered, you'll come back with your final proposal. There is the opportunity there for people to appeal against it. The timing of appeals has to be taken into account. All that has to be considered, as what happened in 2018, if you recall. And then the systems have to be in place in order to be able to have an election in 2025. So the answer to your question is that it's a very difficult task and won't be addressed in the month. That's the issue. I think officers will obviously, and you will do your best to try and raise this, but the reality is you'll be up against the issues that we faced, which is the level of understanding about this. There'll be questions about why some 2 councils and some 1, I'm sure. There'll be a lot of discussion around the community boards. But I think the chapter 10, if you remember that, which we do very fondly, was that we were trying to say, well, look, if we don't think the community boards maybe is a way forward, then the opportunity to engage with local communities and communities of interest is really critical. And we went through, you know, we went through a series of steps that we thought might be useful. But I think the critical thing that we found is that when we went into their patch, as it were, and we talked to them on their home turf, there were a number of really good suggestions, ideas, ways which they could engage with. I mean, one that I remember was that the big problem always has been interpretation and languages. And a lot of them said, look, we have our own newsletters, we have our own social media pages. If council could give us a bit of a summary of something that they were dealing with, we could do that for nothing. We could just add it on, you know. So there was a lot of willingness to assist. You would never hear that in a public meeting, and they would never probably make that suggestion through a formal submission process to an LTP. So it's a massive job. This council's not the only one that's facing that, and if you look at it, you know, across the board, that level of satisfaction is dropping. in I suppose in parliamentary and local government democracy. We felt that it's worth having a look at those things and seeing if an attempt can be made to up that level of engagement. And we felt that if we got the level of engagement about right or improved, then the whole idea of representation structures might follow, was kind of the argument we had. But it's a big job, and it's a long-term job, and it's not going to happen overnight.
Deputy Mayor Lewis.
Thank you, Paul, for the report. It really did, made a lot of thinking in there. My question is around community boards. If we go to 5 wards, it would be 2 more community boards.
Well,
or no, 2 more.
No, well, once again, it will depend on what people say. But our thinking was that if you went to 5 wards with 5, you'd need, 5, potentially 5 community boards. A community board per ward was the general view. At the moment, we've got 1 ward with 2. And so you would need to condense 2 into 1. And so you'd have 1 in Harbour, 1 in Wainuiomata, and 3 in the other wards. But it still came down to the thing is that even with all the will in the world and the high level of promotion, was that going to be the way in which communities that potentially have not been engaged or aren't engaged were going to engage? And we felt it needed a slightly different model. And that was why we came forward with the idea of building a better bridge and using a mechanism that might be slightly different.
So my question is, how many people would be in those community boards?
Oh, no, look, we never really went into numbers on community boards. We started out with the general principle. We looked at how they operate at the moment. And once again, the council's relationship with community boards, we looked at all of that. And we came to the general conclusion that we had that in our view there should be none. So we didn't take it any further, and that could well be a subject for another time. But our view was that our recommendation was that there should be none in Lower Hutt.
Okay, so if it did, my question really is there legislation that in the numbers, like you have to do the ward split for councillors, is it factored in like that?
No, I don't think I'm pretty sure that
we'll move on because I think this is getting a little bit aside from the substance of the report. So Councillor Shaw and then Councillor Tupou, and then we'll try to look to wrap this up. Otherwise, Paul's going to charge us extra.
Oh no, we're on. Oh, that's a good idea, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Paul, for the report and the rest of your panel too as well. I thought it was really comprehensive and interesting reading. My question is going to be similar to Councillor Barrett's in regards to the Northern Ward, because Stokes Valley's geographically challenged, split off from just everyone else around the corner. And so I was a bit interested in your comment that why 5 citywide councillors? It can be 29. Did you consider an extra councillor in the Northern Ward because of that challenge with the geography?
No, we didn't. And part of the issue of the Northern Ward and its feeling of isolation, was raised at one of the meetings that we were at. And the fact that when big issues occur, often up there, the councils feel a bit isolated. And the idea of having 2 was the opportunity to sort of share some of the responsibility. But once again, if you put 3 in there, if you have a look at that table on page, which I can't remember, there's that table that comes about the plus or minuses and all of that. As soon as you start to fiddle with that, it unravels very quickly, like the farmer's fence. So we've kept within what are sort of the requirements around the plus or minus 10%, the fact that every councillor should be representing on average about the same number of people. except the Wainuiomata ward and the exception which I've already said. So we didn't. We thought it was an interesting step to take it to 2, but we didn't consider taking it to 3.
Okay. Some more hands going up now. So the Councillor Tupou.
Through you, Mr Mayor. Kia ora, Paul. I know that there are legislative constraints, but I see that in terms of rangatahi, those in their 20s, I think only a 1% response from that age bracket to the online survey. And was there some robust discussion and feedback on rangatahi representation? Some of us around the table may be sort of started as rangatahi with the community boards and in terms of public service and engagement. So was that a concern?
Yes, it was. Youth, we had a number of priority groups and young people by and large were one of those priority groups because not just the level of participation, but because by and large that they aren't particularly engaged. We recognised in the report that community boards have often been that stepping stone, and there's some good examples in this room. Community boards have been a good stepping stone into the council process. So we recognised that that was a positive to that structure. But we felt that if you know, and there are all sorts of things have been tried, haven't there, in the past, youth councils and all of those, different types of structures. What we felt, going back to our section 10 again, was that if young people generally were identified as a priority group, then you could use some of the tools that we've identified in that section to identify who those groups particularly are and to engage with them on their own turf, rather than trying to bring them into formal structures like community boards. We felt that if you're able to engage with them on their own turf, then we might get a better response. That was the point. And it's really critical, obviously. We all talk about the need for young people to be engaged and to have a say in that sort of thing. The truth is that it's actually really difficult, as you'll all know. But we felt that a much more focused, targeted, tailored approach to a priority area like young people, with a bit of resource tied into that, might be more effective than trying to encourage participation through a community board.
And that's an appropriate time to move to Councillor Morgan.
Kia ora, just segueing. You'll be very pleased, Councillor Tupou, that our rangatahi action plan that we've now approved with the LTP will actually have a designated person to be really working in that space to engage in a really comprehensive way with our young people, which we know will make a massive difference. I just wanted to say thank you and ngā mihi, Paul, to you and the panel and to all the staff involved. I thought this report as a new councillor was really comprehensive. I think I've really struggled with the inequity around the community boards since I've been a part of the council, knowing that some wards are so well represented and so many not. And I don't think that's okay. And I think it's our job to ensure that we do have that equity. I think you've made some amazing suggestions in here because you've had a really pragmatic approach to this with no bias, with no political agenda. And I think that's so important that we continue to remove ourselves as councillors in this space to be operating with that lens. And I guess why I want to raise this today is a little question for you, because for those people listening, this is all going to add to their understanding if they hear this. But what I was really loving is that sense of portfolio that you talked about in there, and maybe having us as councillors linked to a portfolio so that in essence, we could almost become that point of contact to go into those hard to reach communities potentially to give them voice and to give them action. So I just wondered if you could comment on your discussion around portfolios, and ngā mihi, thank you.
Oh, kia ora, Karen. Yes, of course the decision around portfolios is yours, but we did feel that, and we did talk, when we talked to a lot of the groups that we spoke to, they really had no idea who the councillors were and that sort of thing. And we felt that if there was the opportunity for a councillor, not to being responsible for everything that happened in that particular portfolio area, but was seen as the head, the lead, the point of contact, that it would elevate the mana of the engagement. And it was raised by a number of people and a number of our community groups, the groups and organisations that came through, who said that if we had a councillor we could identify with, and we said, well, you know, it's the ward councillor, but we often meet across wards. And if we had somebody we could identify with, that we could go to, then that would be helpful. So that was where it came from. And I know there's, as was discussed on the briefing, there's, you know, councils that have tried portfolios and then bailed out of them. And so, you know, there's nothing new in this business. But we really did believe strongly that if there was a councillor who was identified with a particular group and worked with officers to be able to engage, as I say, on their own turf, on their own patch, rather than waiting for people to come and respond to a survey or to something or to a social media platform. If a councillor was involved in being able to work with officers to be able to engage with that community, then the opportunity to get those voices, in our view, would be much greater than the opportunity at the moment. And that was the reason for it.
Okay, final question, Councillor Dyer.
Final two questions. First question is around the process. Is this your work done now, or are you going to be here in a month's time once we get the results back? Sort of adding your input into that?
No, notwithstanding the Mayor's comment. No, look, really, this is a sort of a sign-off for us. We've handed our taonga to you, and then you take it and consult on it and decide and that sort of thing. You know, we can be available for any clarification, things like that, but this is really the end of our task.
Cool, thank you. And then my second question, obviously I asked the question at the workshop around did you consider remuneration, and obviously you said you didn't. My question is to our engagement team that I think the first question the public's going to have when they see the proposal to add a councillor is going to be just that costs more money. Are we going to explain the remuneration pool stuff within that to make it clear that this won't actually cost anything more?
I know Shelley's there. I can also say that we've got some FAQs to go out, which I saw earlier, with the report. There will be a number of areas where we know people will have questions. Remuneration's one of them. The other thing will be, does everybody have the same vote? So there's a whole set of FAQs which will, obviously we won't finalise until the council's made its decision, but we'll be able to share those very quickly. Is that right, Shelley?
Yep. So we can cover that off in there. Yep. Great. Councillor Parkin.
Kara, this is actually a question for officers, hence why I held off on it. And that is, could we please go back to ensure that we do include the Likert scale in the analysis and the request for information and feedback in that process, because it does give us a much more refined view of whether or not somebody really hates an idea or whether or not they actually like it but prefer the other one more so, and it will make our lives easier, especially when it comes to the community boards. Ngā mihi.
Great. Final comment from myself. Ultimately, it is up to each councillor how you wish to engage and consult through this process. It is no different to any other process. What I would say, though, and certainly my approach will be, is I'll be relying on our engagement team to be leading this. To be able to ensure, again, I think that perception of allowing this process in our community to be able to feed back to us what they think about the proposal, ultimately, so we can make a decision. But again, it is up to each person, and of course the community boards. Totally over to you how you choose to submit and engage with your community on the proposal as well. I do want to acknowledge, as I did in the briefing, that with the proposal that is put forward, you know, it is quite jarring for the communities of Petone, Wainuiomata and Eastbourne, who have had community boards for my entire lifetime and longer, so for some time. So just acknowledging that, but also, you know, I do acknowledge, as others have, the independence of the report, and that is why, as others have said, I've fully supported this process. Even if you had said, suggested to get rid of the mayor, I wouldn't have. I would have accepted it. And so, for me, it's important that we allow this to run through as clean as possible, for us to be able to make some ultimately some difficult decisions at the end of the process. Okay, so I'll put the recommendations that we have on page 124. I'll recommend them 1 through to 8. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Barrett. Any discussion? Councillor Briggs.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just one point that's come up tonight around the language around equity. Just want to make the clear point that the 10% rule and around community boards is actually around equality. It's looking around the number of people represented at our council or community boards per population, and that's very different to an equity lens. And so through any engagement, just kind of urging our colleagues and also officers to look around those two different distinct things, because if we were using an equity lens, representation will look very different as a whole for our city and our approach to tackling the issue as well. So I think it's really important for our communities that we talk around what we're proposing and use the right language as well.
Any other comments? Councillor Stallinger.
Yes, I'm happy to support this as well. If it wasn't going out for consultation, I'd probably have some other thoughts. Let's pause and do a little bit more work, but we'll be able to do that once we have the feedback and over the intervening period. And particularly, I'm referring to the decision or the proposal relating to community boards. I think there's a good argument put up by the panel. I guess from my own point of view, I'd like to see what would be in place of the community boards before a decision's made. There are none, and we don't have that yet. So I'm hoping we'll have a bit more clarity on options and what more detail of the proposal will be as we get towards the end. I say that because I've probably spent 20 years at which I've been to every community board in the city with a bit of a break in between, and just been around each one recently. And I guess my brief observation would be not a lot of decisions made in terms of council decisions that we have to make across all of us, but there's certainly a lot of value added in different ways at times by the boards. And just as by way of example, I've always remembered the Eastbourne Community Board's walk around, which they did, I think, once a year or once every 6 months, I'm not sure, with a staff member, whole list of observations, small budget improvements and tidy-ups that could be made in the community, and it was very valuable. So I'm mentioning that just because I'll be looking to see what we'll be doing in the future if there are no community boards that still provides a mechanism for achieving at least what community boards have done in regards to things like that. Thanks.
Okay, my final comment would just be to formally thank the panel. Paul, if you can pass on our thanks to all of the members who have contributed to this point in time, that would be great. The only thing I would just say, just from an expectation point of view, Councillor Salinger, on that, is we do have to be careful. I think the team could put forward, hey, well, here's some alternatives, but ultimately it's the will of the council of the day. So post next election, there may not be a guarantee even if this council was to propose a certain structure. So I think we've just got to be careful with that when we're making those final decisions, but we can certainly explore what that could look like as well. Okay, so put it to the vote. All those in favour say aye. Those against no. Declare that carried. Moving through to item 12, which is questions. I've received no questions, so I'll go to our closing karakia. Please feel free to join me. Unuhia, unuhia, unuhia e te uru tapunui, kia wātia, kia wāt, nāko, tia tina, tia wādua e te atatakatu. Koia re o rongo, whakaeri aki ki o runga, kia wātia, ora, kua wātia, hau, paumarie. And I'll declare our meeting closed at 5:59 p.m.